Hola everyone, welcome to Open. I'm Rhina Valentin, your host of CACF for the next hour, encouraging you to get social with us online. That is, tweet us and follow us on Instagram at BronxNet TV and like us on Facebook at Open BronxNet Television. And of course, while you're there, you can follow moi on Twitter, FB, Instagram, Insta Stories, and LinkedIn at Rhina Valentin. So the COVID-19 pandemic has led to all types of civil unrest, including the discrimination against Asian Americans. And since the virus's origins being identified as coming from Wuhan, China, there have been verbal, physical attacks, and unnecessary deaths. Organizations such as Coalition for Asian American Children and Families have been in the forefront dismantling racism, with their efforts being driven by building a progressive voice within the Asian community. And joining us to tell us more, we welcome the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families Co-Executive Director, Anita Gundanna. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, Rhina.
So let's just open up with educating the viewers of what it means to be of Asian descent, right? I think people need to be educated in that realm as well, because you don't necessarily look like one would assume to be the co-executive of the Asian American Children and Families Coalition.
That's right, and I get that a lot. So yeah, I mean, at CACF, which is the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families for short, we are constantly talking about the diversity of our Asian American community. You know, we're the nation's only Pan-Asian children's advocacy organization. And by Pan-Asian, we are talking about a huge region of the world. People, New Yorkers, who are Asian American, hail from South Asian countries, India, Nepal, Bangladesh, Pakistan, to East Asian countries, China, Korea, Japan, and Southeast Asian countries like Vietnam, Cambodia. We're also working in close partnership with more of the Central Asian countries and Arab American organizations as well through CACF. So it's really, you know, Asian American is absolutely not a monolith, and that's a stereotype that we often face.
Yeah, which brings me to the stereotypes of all of Asian Americans, right? And then there's also the unity within the Asian American community as well.
Yeah, so actually it's both, right? So the stereotype is that Asian American is kind of like one thing, right? A monolith that we're all kind of successful, we're the model minority, which is absolutely not true. In fact, Asian Americans face a high level of poverty in New York City. Right here, we have a quarter of our Asian American communities living in poverty. We have high levels of overcrowded housing. We have, we're a heavily immigrant community, upwards of over 70% immigrant, almost 80% immigrant in nature. We have limited English proficiency, speaking multiple tens of languages and hundreds of dialects. So it's a very complicated community facing a lot of challenges and needs. And so I think that the myth of the monolith, the myth of the foreigner is another myth that we face, a stereotype that we're all not from this country. And so, you know, I get this question a lot, you know, oh, your English is so good. You know, you don't speak without an accent. And so it's that, you know, you have to understand Asian Americans have been in this country for generations, for hundreds of years now. And so many of us, like myself, are born here, and many of us don't look like the quote unquote typical Asian American that you would think. So, you know, I do think that these stereotypes have been hurtful to our community, and they are rooted deeply in racism. So racism isn't something new to our community at all, and our communities have faced. I mean, and if you think about the diversity within, you think about South Asian communities and the backlash and the, you know, our Muslim brothers and sisters in the backlash after 9/11. You think further back about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. You think further back of laws and policies that were exclusionary to Chinese Americans back in the 1800s, which were, by the way, some of the very first immigration laws that were racially targeted. Was the Chinese Exclusion Act back in the 1800s. So racism isn't a new thing for the diversity within our Asian American communities. And,
right. Well, diversity, period, within the community of diversity, period, right? And
right.
so just really, I mean, it's being brought into a light like never before during this particular time. And so I'm just going to refer to the organization in acronyms as well, CACF. Like what kind of resources are you offering to people in this particular time to assist further with just really dismantling the system?
Yeah, so CACF is really committed to building a community around progressive values within the Asian American community. And it is definitely a political identity, Asian American. And so as strongly as we believe in what we call disaggregating our community, or really appreciating and acknowledging what each individual diverse Asian American community or ethnic group is facing, because there are very different challenges across different parts of our community. We also believe in coming together and building a strong Asian American political voice for progress and change. And part of that is what is our work is uniting our community under this broader Asian American identity when it is necessary and helpful to really bring light to some of our issues. And for many years, our community has been erased from the data that exists. Through the pandemic, we've seen our community not being acknowledged in terms of the impacts of COVID-19, but even before that, there's been a lot of confusion and an erasure around our community. That's been kind of a misunderstanding of who we are. So CACF is building through our coalition. We have a membership of almost 50 Asian-led and serving nonprofit organizations, and we partner with many, many more. We are also really, as we build within our community in a united way, we're building across communities of color. So we recognize that if we're going to address racism, and if we're really going to do the work that it takes to build systems and structures that support all of those who are most marginalized, including Asian Americans, we really need to work with communities of color and not be split. And going back to stereotypes, as you mentioned, the stereotype of this model minority has been really splitting for us.
Right.
In fact, yeah, it's rooted in anti-Black racism. During the civil rights era, that's when folks started talking about this Asian Americans as this model minority. And what it was trying to do was really pit community against community. If you call somebody a model, what are you saying about another community, right? Right. And so we cannot fall prey to that myth, because that's the splitting myth that will not allow us to really work together to challenge the structures that we all need to challenge in order to thrive and to
right.
really survive and move forward.
And pivot everything, right? Everybody's always talked about pivot, right? That's the theme word for this entire year. However, we're being forced to pivot, and in that pivot comes that joint unity and remain and being in solidarity. And so before we go, I know you had mentioned that there was an effort being made that was being addressed to the state. So let's just mention that really quickly before we go.
Right. So part of our work is building our community, building our voice. And a lot of it is because we've been erased for so long, we haven't had the resources that our community needs. And so community organizations are on the front line right now, providing services through the pandemic, facing and fighting the xenophobia that we faced really back since January of 2020, before New York went on pause, and also right now with the spike of anti-Asian violence, and the fears and anxieties in our community, in our Asian American community, is so real and palatable right now, the struggle. And so these community organizations are supremely under-resourced, have been for many years, and continue to work so. So we're asking Governor Cuomo and New York State to step up right now and take this opportunity to fund and resource our Asian American CBOs by providing $19.5 million, which is really a drop in the budget of a state budget, drop in the bucket of a state budget. We're asking Governor Cuomo to fund our community organizations on the front lines, doing the work and helping our communities heal right now with a $19.5 million package for Asian American communities.
Well done and well said. Thank you. Anita Gundanna, co-executive of the Asian American, actually the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. And here's to rebooting the Rainbow Coalition, because that's the direction it looks like we're all headed in. Thanks for being here with us. You guys, for more information on CACF programs, campaign, and COVID-related resources, you can visit cacf.org. All right, we have to take a quick break, but when we return, we'll hear how some individuals have been dealing with the pandemic. So don't go anywhere.